Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins.
The Lost Art of Numenorean Shipbuilding. A Tale of the Elder Days, Section 1. Shadowed Beginnings. In the grey hours before dawn, when mist clung to the ancient stones of Mythlond like the memories of ages past, Círdan the shipwright stood upon the weathered quay and gazed westward toward waters that had swallowed kingdoms whole. The grey havens stretched before him in solemn majesty, yet something in the very timber of the dock spoke of diminishment, of arts fading like stars before the coming of the sun. The harbour waters lay still as polished silver, disturbed only by the gentle lapping against hulls of ships that bore the mark of mortal hands, sturdy vessels, true, but lacking the song that once rang from Numenorean keels. Where once the great ships of the Star Isle had cut through wave and storm with hulls that gleamed like captured starlight, now only fishing boats and coastal traders rocked in the tide's embrace. Círdan's weathered fingers traced the rail of his own craft, the Vingelotta's Echo, last of the ships built in the old manor. Her timbers remembered the forests of Numenor, the songs of the shipwrights who had shaped her with more than axe and adze. In her wood dwelt the wisdom of Gil-galad's court, the blessing of Elrond's forge fire, and something deeper still, the echo of arts learned in blessed lands across the sea. But the darkness was stirring. Even here, in this sanctuary of the wise, Círdan felt it like a chill wind from the east. The shadow that had fallen upon Numenor in the deeps of time was not content to rest in the drowned halls of Armenelos. It reached still with grasping fingers, seeking to corrupt all that remained of the Island Kingdom's glory. The very craft that had once been the pride of the Dúnedain was failing, ship by ship, as the knowledge passed from living memory into legend. A raven cawed from the harbour master's tower, its voice harsh in the morning stillness. Círdan turned from the water and walked slowly toward the great forge halls, where the sounds of hammering had grown ever more infrequent. Today, like many days before, the anvil stood cold. The apprentices no longer came to learn the old songs, the old ways of reading the grain of wood and the will of the wind. In the east, beyond the misty mountains, beyond even the borders of mapped lands, something ancient and patient was awakening. And in that stirring, the last echoes of Numenorean craft faced their final test. For ships are more than wood and sail, and the darkness that covets them seeks not merely vessels, but the very soul of the sea itself. Section 2. A Whisper in the Trees. 3 days hence from that grey dawn, Círdan walked the paths of the old forest that bordered his realm, where the trees grew tall and spoke in tongues older than elvish song. Here, among the ash and oak whose roots remembered the first ships ever hewn from living wood, he sought counsel from voices that had witnessed the rise and fall of the Numenorean fleet. The wind stirred the leaves above him, and in their rustling he heard fragments of memory. The ring of shipwright hammers in Ramenna's yards, the songs of the rope-weavers of Andunia, the deep horn calls that once echoed from the Tower of the King when the great ships returned from their voyages to the furthest shores. All of this lived still in the heartwood of these ancient trees, for they had given of themselves willingly to craft vessels worthy of the blessed realm's children. But there was something else in the windsong now, a discordant note that made the shipwright pause and press his palm against the trunk of a mighty elm. Through the bark, through the sapwood and the heart he felt it, a tremor of wrongness, as if some great tree far away had screamed in the moment of its falling. Not the clean death of timber taken with blessing and gratitude, but something fouler, the rape of living wood, the corruption of the green things of the earth. "The old enemy stirs," whispered the elm in the speech of leaves and creaking bough. In the darkness beyond darkness, where no star shines, the black Numenoreans practice their craft. They who were once the proudest of shipwrights now build vessels of shadow and malice, and their ships sail not on water, but on the very tears of the sea herself. Círdan closed his eyes and let the tree's memory flow through him. He saw dark harbours where no gull dared cry, shipyards where the hammers sang discordant songs of domination rather than harmony. In those accursed places, the descendants of Numenor's greatest craftsmen bent their knowledge to evil purpose, building ships not to bear their kin to blessed shores, but to carry terror and conquest to every coast touched by tide. The vision faded, but its weight remained. The shipwright opened his eyes and looked westward through the trees, toward the sea that held both promise and peril. Somewhere beyond the curve of the world, the straight road still led to the undying lands, but it was guarded now more closely than ever, for the shadows sought passage there as well, in ships wrought of corrupted craft and darkened will. Section 3. The Lone Rider. On the fourth day, when the sun hung low and red above the western waters, a lone horse came thundering down the coast road toward Mithlond. Its rider bent low against the wind, cloak streaming like a banner of urgency, and foam flecked the mount's flanks as it bore its burden toward the grey havens with desperate speed. Círdan heard the hoofbeats from his position in the harbour-master's tower and felt his heart quicken with foreboding. The rider was Glorfindel of Rivendell, and his fair face was marked with lines of weariness and concern. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his boots striking the stone quay with purpose that spoke of tidings too grave for delay. The golden light that usually crowned his brow was dimmed, as if clouds had passed before an inner sun. Círdan, he called, his voice carrying across the water with the clarity of elvish bells. Dark news flies on swifter wings than I. The watchers in the north have seen ships that bear no banner of any rightful realm, yet sail with purpose toward the coasts of Lindon. The shipwright descended from his tower, each step measured and deliberate. Around them, the harbour folk had ceased their labours to listen, for the arrival of one of the mighty of Rivendell was no common thing. Gulls wheeled overhead in restless circles, as if they too sensed the weight of ill tidings. "What manner of ships?" Círdan asked, though in his heart he already knew. The vision granted by the elm had prepared him for this moment, yet still he hoped for words that would not come. Glorfindel's eyes were grave as winter seas. "Black ships, my friend, black as the void between stars, with sails that seem to drink the very light of day. They move against the wind when it suits them, and leave no wake upon the water. The Dunedain of the Northern Watch speak of them in whispers, for their very sight brings dreams of drowning and darkness." Together they walked toward the ancient lighthouse that crowned the harbour's eastern point. Here, where Gil-galad himself had once kept vigil against the shadow, they could speak of such matters without fear of spreading panic among the workers. The lighthouse keeper, an Argead elf named Eristor's son, greeted them with a bow and withdrew to grant them privacy. "How many ships?" Círdan inquired, his gaze fixed upon the horizon where evening stars began to gleam. 7 were counted, though the watchers believe more follow. They sail in formation as if guided by a single will, and they bear the curved prows of Numenorean design, yet twisted, corrupted, bearing figureheads carved in shapes that hurt the eye to look upon. Glorfindel paused, his hand resting on the lighthouse rail. There is worse news still. Sailors who have glimpsed them speak of voices carried on the wind, the voices of the drowned, crying out in languages that predate the sundering of the world. Círdan nodded slowly, pieces of an ancient puzzle falling into place. "The Black Numenoreans," he murmured, "those who fled the downfall and have nursed their hatred in far places. They have not forgotten the shipcraft of their fathers, but they have perverted it beyond recognition." The wind shifted, bringing with it the salt tang of deep ocean and something else, a faint acrid scent like burned offerings or corrupted incense. Both elves turned toward the sea, and for a moment at the very edge of sight, they thought they glimpsed dark shapes moving against the crimson sunset. Section 4. Dol Guldur in the distance, 7 leagues to the east of Mithlond, where the river Lune bent toward its meeting with the sea, stood the ruins of an ancient watchtower. Here, in the days of Gil-galad's reign, sentries had kept vigil against threats from both land and water. Now the tower lay broken, its stones scattered by time and storm, yet something of its purpose lingered in the very earth beneath. It was here that Círdan came in the deep of night, when the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the sea spoke in voices too old for mortal ears to comprehend. He had left Glorfindel at the haven, charging him to gather such warriors as could be spared, while he himself sought insight in the place where the boundaries between sea and shore, between memory and prophecy, grew thin. The broken stones were white with age and salt spray, and phosphorescent fungi traced strange patterns along their surfaces, patterns that seemed almost like the script of ancient Numenor, yet wrong somehow. as if written by hands that remembered the shapes but not the meaning. Círdan placed his palm against the largest of the fallen blocks and let his consciousness drift beyond the confines of flesh and time. In the space between heartbeats he soared. His spirit sight carried him beyond the horizon, beyond the curve of the world, to waters where no honest ship had sailed for many an age. There, beneath skies that knew no sun, he beheld a sight that filled even his ancient heart with dread. A harbour carved from black volcanic glass stretched before him, its waters reflecting no light save the baleful glow of forge fires that burned beneath the waves. In this accursed haven rode the ships of the Black Numenoreans, vessels of such malevolent beauty that they seemed like works of art created by a mad god. Their hulls were wrought of wood that had never known the kiss of honest sunlight, timber taken from trees that grew in soil watered by the tears of the enslaved. Their sails were woven from threads of shadow itself, and their rigging sang with voices of the damned. 7 ships lay at anchor, as Glorfindel had reported, but beyond them Círdan's enhanced sight perceived the truth. Dozens more were under construction in the dry docks of this nightmare harbour. Shipwrights laboured there under the lash of overseers whose eyes burned with unnatural fire, and their hammers rang out a rhythm that spoke not of creation, but of domination, conquest, and the subjugation of all free waters to the will of the shadow. At the harbour's heart stood a tower that dwarfed even the greatest works of Numenor's pride. Its walls were black as night and smooth as glass, and from its crown flew a banner that hurt the mind to perceive, a device of such malevolent power that it seemed to drink light from the very stars. This was the stronghold of Morgoth's heir among the sons of the Sea Kings, the one who had gathered to himself all the corrupted knowledge of Numenorean shipcraft and bent it to the service of ultimate evil. The vision shattered like glass against stone as Círdan's consciousness snapped back to his own body. He found himself kneeling among the ruins, blood upon his lips from the force of his return. The stars overhead seemed dimmer now, as if some of their light had been stolen by what he had witnessed. Yet in the darkness, he had gained knowledge that might yet serve the cause of those who fought against the shadow. Section 5. Into the Black. When dawn broke grey and cheerless over the grey havens, Círdan had already made his choice. The knowledge gained in his spirit journey burned within him like a coal, demanding action, though the path ahead led through perils that might claim even one of the firstborn. He stood once more upon his ship, the Vingelota's Echo, but now she was laden with more than memories. In her hold lay weapons forged in the elder days, and upon her deck stood 12 of the most valiant elves of Lindon. Glorfindel had argued against the venture, as had Elrond when word was sent swift-flying to Rivendell. "The seas are vast," the Lord of Rivendell had written in his reply, "and these black ships move by arts we do not fully comprehend. To seek them in the wide waters may be to sail into a trap from which even your skill cannot extract you." Yet Círdan's resolve remained unshaken. The corrupted ships represented more than a threat to the coastal realms. They were an abomination that struck at the very heart of all he held sacred. The craft of shipbuilding had been a gift from the Valar themselves, taught to the elves in the music of Ol's forge and the whispered wisdom of Ulmo's waves. To see that gift perverted into an instrument of darkness was a wound that could not be borne in silence. The Echo slipped her moorings in the hour before sunrise, when mist still clung to the water and the lighthouse beams swept lonely arcs across the harbour mouth. Her crew worked in reverent silence, for all understood the gravity of their mission. These were elves who had sailed with Gil-galad himself, who had witnessed the last alliance and the siege of Barad-dûr. They knew the weight of darkness and the price of light. As they passed beyond the sheltering arms of the harbour, Círdan felt the sea's mood shift beneath his keel. Here, in the deep waters where ancient currents met and parted, the very ocean seemed to whisper warnings. Waves that should have been regular grew choppy and uncertain, as if the sea herself recoiled from what moved upon her surface. Dolphins, those friends of honest sailors, were nowhere to be seen, and the gulls that followed every ship grew silent and turned back toward shore. By noon, they had passed beyond the sight of land, and still they sailed westward into waters that grew progressively stranger. The sun, though it shone without cloud, seemed to give less light than it should, and shadows fell at angles that defied the laws of nature. The wind, when it blew, carried scents of burning and decay, and more than once the lookouts reported shapes moving beneath the waves, shapes too large and wrong to be any creature born of natural waters. It was Telchar the Farsighted who first called out the warning that brought every soul on deck to the starboard rail. There, hull down on the horizon, 7 black shapes cut through the water with purposeful grace. Even at such distance, their wrongness was apparent. They moved too smoothly, left wakes too straight, and the very air above them seemed to shimmer with heat like that which rises from a forge. "Signal torches," Círdan commanded, his voice carrying clearly in the unnatural stillness. "Let them know we see them. Let them know we do not fear their shadow." Flames sprang to life at bow and stern of the Echo, their clean light a challenge flung across the darkening waters, and in response from the black ships came an answer that chilled the blood of even the bravest, the sound of horns deep and mournful that seemed to call up memories of the downfall itself. Section 6. The Captive King. The black ships came not with the fury of raiders, but with the inexorable certainty of tide itself. They moved in formation, 7 vessels of shadow that cut through the waves as if the sea parted willingly before their cursed keels. As they drew near, details became visible that made even the stout-hearted elves of Círdan's crew exchange glances of unease. The ships bore the lines of ancient Numenorean craft, yet perverted beyond recognition. Their prows curved like the necks of sea serpents, carved with figureheads that seemed to writhe and shift when glimpsed from the corner of the eye. Their sails, black as moonless nights, bore devices worked in silver thread. Stars inverted, trees withered, and crowns broken. Most disturbing of all were the crews visible upon their decks. Tall figures wrapped in grey robes, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods, moving with a terrible unity of purpose. The largest of the black ships, her bow adorned with a figurehead of twisted gold, drew alongside the Vingelote's Echo with a precision that spoke of supernatural seamanship. Grappling hooks of black iron flew across the gap between vessels, and before Círdan could give word, a gangplank had been lowered, and the robed figures began to cross. "Hold!" Círdan called, his voice carrying the authority of ages upon the sea. "By what right do you board my vessel? What business have the children of shadow with honest mariners?" The foremost of the robed figures raised his head, and Círdan felt his breath catch in his throat. The face revealed was noble still, bearing the high cheekbones and piercing eyes of the Numenorean kings, yet marked by lines of sorrow so deep they seemed carved by eons of regret. When he spoke, his voice carried the music of ancient Westernesse, though now it was a song in a minor key. "I am Heremer, once lord of ships, in the fleet of Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, last king of Numenor beneath the waves. I name you Círdan Shipwright, lord of the grey havens, and I come not as enemy, but as one who would speak of matters that concern the fate of all who love the sea." A murmur ran through the crew of the Echo, for the name of Heremer was known in the lore of the elder days, one of the 2 great lords who had followed the mouth of Sauron into exile after the downfall, becoming leaders among the black Numenoreans in Farumbar. Yet here he stood, and in his eyes was not the madness of those wholly given to darkness, but something more complex, the pain of one who remembered light yet could no longer dwell within it. "Speak then," Círdan replied, though his hand remained near the hilt of his blade. "Yet know that no words of yours can turn me from the path of right, no matter how fair they seem." Heremer's lips curved in what might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. "I come not to corrupt, Lord Círdan, but to warn. In the harbours of shadow where my people have made their dwelling, a greater evil stirs than you know. Ships are being built there, ships that will make these 7 seem as fishing boats before war galleys. The one you call the enemy has not forgotten the sea, and he means to claim dominion over all waters before his final victory." "And why," Círdan asked carefully, "should one of the black Numenoreans warn against his own master's designs?" For a long moment, Heremer was silent, his gaze fixed upon the western horizon where the sun sank toward the waters. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of centuries. "Because I remember Numenor as she was before the shadow came. I remember the white ships of Elros, and the songs of the rope weavers, and the blessing of the valour upon our craft. That memory burns in me still, a coal of agony that neither time nor corruption can extinguish." Section 7. The Necromancer's Voice. As the sun touched the rim of the world and began its descent toward the uttermost west, Herima spoke of things that no servant of the light had heard from living lips. His words painted pictures of vast shipyards in the uttermost south, where the descendants of Numenor's proudest houses laboured under the whips of the Nine. He told of trees that had never known the blessing of sun or rain, harvested from forests where only shadow grew, their wood black as night and hard as iron. "The mouth of Sauron has gathered to himself all the lore of our people," Herima continued, his voice growing ever more heavy with sorrow. Every scroll saved from Numenor's libraries, every song preserved in the memory of the survivors, every secret of shipcraft learned in the elder days. All of this has been twisted into the service of the Dark Lord. Ships are being built that will sail not only upon the waters of the sea, but upon the very winds of heaven, carrying war to realms that thought themselves beyond the reach of Middle-earth's shadow. Círdan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening wind. Ships that sail upon the wind itself. What manner of abomination is this? "Do you think," Herima replied, "that the Valar taught your people all their secrets? The craft of shipbuilding touches upon the music of creation itself, and in that music are harmonies that mortal ears have never heard. The enemy has found ways to corrupt those harmonies, to build vessels that partake more of spirit than of matter. Soon his fleet will darken not only the sea, but the very sky." From the western waters came a sound that made every soul upon both ships turn toward its source, a low moaning, as of wind through empty halls, yet underneath it was another note, deeper and more terrible. It was the sound of something vast stirring in the depths, something that had slumbered long in the abyssal trenches, where even the eye of Ulmo did not pierce. Herima's face went pale beneath his hood. "He comes," he whispered. "I have lingered too long in speech with you, Lord Círdan. The leash upon which the mouth of Sauron holds me grows tight." The water between the two ships began to roil and bubble, as if heated by some furnace far below. A phosphorescent glow spread upward from the depths, and in that sickly light shapes could be glimpsed, vast tentacles that belonged to no creature of the natural world, and eyes like burning coals that regarded the vessels above with alien intelligence. "Flee!" Herima cried, and his voice cracked with anguish. "Take your knowledge back to the Grey Havens, warn the wise of what comes. The sea herself is corrupted where my master's influence reaches, and no clean ship can long endure these waters." As if his words had broken some invisible barrier, a voice arose from the depths, not heard with the ears, but felt in the very bones and sinews of all who rode upon the water. It spoke in the black speech, words of command and domination, and under its influence the 7 black ships began to change. Their hulls stretched and twisted, becoming more serpentine, their sails unfurled like vast bat wings, and their crews threw back their hoods to reveal faces that were no longer entirely human. Círdan needed no further urging. "Cut the grapples," he commanded. "All hands, make sail. We must win free of these accursed waters while we still may." The Vingelot's echo leaped forward like a living thing, her blessed timbers straining against the unnatural currents that sought to drag her down into the phosphorescent depths. Behind them, Herima's voice could be heard one last time, crying out words in the ancient tongue of Numenor, whether curse or blessing none could say, but they carried across the water like the lament of a lost soul seeking redemption. Section 8. Fire in the Darkness. The race for the eastern horizon became a trial that tested both ship and crew beyond all endurance. The Vingelotta's echo ran before a wind that seemed born of desperation itself, her sails straining against forces that sought to tear them apart. Behind her, the 7 black ships gave chase, but they had been transformed by their master's call into things that barely resembled vessels at all. They moved through the water like living shadows, their twisted hulls cutting through wave and foam with serpentine grace. Círdan stood at the stern, his hands gripping the tiller with white-knuckled intensity, while around him his crew worked with the desperate efficiency of those who know that failure means more than death. The corrupted waters through which they sailed seemed to drain the very life from their timbers, and more than once the shipwright felt his vessel shudder as if in pain. "Lord Círdan," called Telchar from the masthead, "the black ships gain upon us, and there is something in the water, something vast that follows in their wake." Indeed, the phosphorescent disturbance that had marked their enemy's presence was spreading, turning the sea into a lake of sickly fire. In that unnatural illumination, shapes could be glimpsed that belonged to no earthly ocean, things with too many eyes and mouths, servants of the deep that had been called up from trenches where the very water was poisoned with malice. But Círdan had not spent millennia perfecting the art of shipcraft, only to be bested by corruption, no matter how ancient. As the black ships closed the distance, he began to sing, not the working songs that guided timber and sail, but something far older and more potent. It was a song he had learned in Valinor itself, in the days when the world was young and the music of creation still echoed fresh in every living thing. The words flowed from him in the pure tongue of the blessed realm, and as they did, the echo began to change. Her timbers, already blessed by ancient craft, became something more. They remembered their origins in the singing trees of Numenor, the blessings of elven smiths, and the touch of starlight upon their grain. The ship's wake began to shine with clean white light, cutting through the corruption like a blade through shadow. The effect upon their pursuers was immediate and terrible. Where the clean wake touched the phosphorescent waters, the sickly glow died away, and the creatures of the deep fled shrieking back to their abyssal homes. The black ships, robbed of the unnatural forces that drove them, began to lose speed, their transformed hulls struggling against waters that had remembered purity. Yet the enemy's malice was not so easily thwarted. From the largest of the black ships came a sound that made the very air tremble, the blowing of a horn carved from the tusk of some primordial beast. At its call, the sky itself began to darken, not with natural clouds, but with a creeping blackness that devoured stars. In that artificial night, new horrors took shape, winged things that had never known the blessing of light, servants of the air as corrupt as their cousins of the deep. Nazgul, breathed one of the crew, and the word carried such dread that several of his companions faltered in their work. But Círdan's song rose higher still, and now it was joined by other voices. His crew had taken up the ancient melody, their elvish voices weaving harmonies that spoke of hope enduring, of light that no shadow could wholly quench. The ship's rigging began to sing in resonance with their song, and her sails caught a wind that blew from no earthly quarter, the breath of Manwë himself carrying them towards safety on wings of divine grace. Section 9. Return to the Wise Dawn found the Vingilotte's echo limping into the Grey Havens, her crew exhausted but alive, her hull scored by the touch of corrupted waters yet still sound. Word of their return had preceded them, carried by the seabirds who served as messengers between the havens and the inland realms, and a crowd had gathered upon the quays to witness their homecoming. Elrond himself stood waiting at the harbour's edge, his face grave with concern, and his eyes reflecting depths of worry that spoke of sleepless nights spent in council with the wise. Beside him stood Galadriel, Lady of Lothlorien, her presence like starlight made manifest, and the very air around her seemed to shimmer with power barely contained. As the ship was made fast to the pier, Círdan walked slowly down the gangplank, each step weighted with the burden of knowledge too terrible to bear alone. The assembled crowd fell silent as they looked upon him, for the shipwright bore visible marks of his encounter with Shadow. His hair, once silver as moonlight, now held streaks of pure white, and his eyes held depths that spoke of visions no living being should have witnessed. The reports of the Watchers were true then, Elrond said without preamble. The black ships are more than raiders or pirates. They serve a darker purpose. Círdan nodded wearily. More than you know, Lord Elrond. I have spoken with Herimor himself, he who was once Lord of Ships in Númenor's fleet. The enemy has not forgotten the sea, and what he plans will make the wars upon land seem as children's games by comparison. Galadriel stepped forward, her gaze piercing as she studied the shipwright's face. You have looked upon corruption itself, she observed. The shadow has touched your spirit, yet you have not yielded to it. Tell us what you have learned, that the wise may take counsel. In the great hall of the harbour master's house, with its windows looking out upon waters that reflected the morning light like scattered diamonds, Círdan spoke of all he had witnessed. He told of the black harbour where corrupted shipwrights laboured under the whips of the Nine, of vessels being built that could sail upon wind as easily as water, of the vast intelligence that stirred in the ocean's depths at the enemy's call. Ships that sail upon the wind, Elrond mused, his fingers steepled before him. This speaks of craft that partakes more of the spiritual than the material realm. Such vessels could carry war to places we have deemed safe, to the hidden valleys, to the secret havens, even perhaps to the borders of the blessed realm itself. Galadriel's voice carried, the weight of prophecy when she spoke. In my mirror, I've seen glimpses of darkness upon waters that should know only light. The enemy seeks to corrupt the very pathways by which the faithful may sail west, to close forever the straight road that leads to redemption. Then what hope is there? Asked one of the assembled councillors. If even the sea is to be turned against us, where may the free peoples find refuge? Tyrden raised his head, and in his eyes was a light that had not been there when he first returned. Hope lies where it has always lain, in the courage of those who will not yield, and in the craft that serves the light rather than the shadow. Herema spoke truly when he said that ships of spiritual essence are being built in the black harbours. But if such craft can be made to serve evil, then surely they can be made to serve good as well. You speak of building ships to match the enemy's fleet, Elrond said slowly, but the knowledge required lives still, Gyrdan interrupted, in the memory of the trees, in the songs of the deep waters, in the very music that shaped the world. The arts of Numenor were never wholly lost, only forgotten by those who turned away from the light. It is time to remember them and to build ships worthy of the blessed realm itself. Let him rage, Thorin replied, a grim smile upon his face. We have what we came for and more. The kingdom under the mountain may be reclaimed in truth when the time is right. But first, we must ensure that the ships of starlight sail to victory. Section 10. Stirring the North. In the days that followed the great council at Mithlond, riders went forth upon swift horses to every corner of the free lands. They bore with them letters sealed with the sigil of the White Tree, written in the flowing script of the Eldar, carrying words that would awaken ancient alliances and stir long slumbering powers to action. Northward rode Glorfindel toward the lonely mountain, where under Erebor's root the dwarves delved deep in halls of stone and fire. The message he carried spoke not of gold or glory, but of a threat that reached beyond the boundaries of any single realm. For if the seas themselves fell under the dominion of shadow, what mountain fastness could hope to stand unconquered? Thrain, son of Thror, received the Elf Lord in the great throne hall where the Arkenstone cast its light upon walls carved with the deeds of kings. The Dwarf King's face grew grave as he listened to the tale of black ships and corrupted craft. For his people had their own memories of the sea, memories of the great harbour of Numenor where dwarven masons had worked alongside the shipwrights of the Star Isle. My people know somewhat of shipbuilding, Thrain rumbled, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. In the days of the alliance between Numenor and Khazad-dûm, we crafted the great anchors and the iron fittings for the ships of Tar Eldarien. That knowledge is not lost, though. It sleeps in the deepest archives. Then will you aid us? Glorfindel asked. The ships we must build will require iron worked with skill beyond the common craft, metal that can hold blessing and bear the weight of songs. The Dwarf King was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed upon the Arkenstone as if seeking counsel from its ancient light. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of kings. Iron we can provide, and skill in its working. But know this, Lord Glorfindel, such a fleet as you describe will require more than the strength of any single people. The ancient songs speak of ships that were wrought not by elf, or dwarf, or man alone, but by all the free peoples working in harmony. Meanwhile, other messengers rode to other realms. To the hidden valley of Rivendell came word that the great library must be searched for every scroll and tome that spoke of shipcraft. Elrond himself descended into the deepest vaults, where books bound in scales of dragons told of the first ships that sailed upon Belegar in the elder days. In Lothlorien, Galadriel walked among the Malorn trees and sang to them in the tongue of growing things, seeking their counsel about timber that might serve for hulls both fair and strong. The great trees swayed at her song, their golden leaves whispering of a grove that lay hidden in the uttermost north, where trees of the elder days still grew untouched by shadow. There is a place, she told Celeborn as they walked together beneath the starlit boughs, where the trees remember the music of creation itself. Their wood might serve for the keels of ships that could sail beyond the circles of the world. But the way is perilous, and the guardians of that grove have slept long. Yet perhaps the most crucial message went eastward, carried by a ranger of the north toward the borders of Rovanion. There, in halls built beside the great river, dwelt the remnant of the Northmen who had once served as allies to the kings of Numenor. Among them lived Fram the Tall, whose ancestors had been sea captains in the days before the downfall. The messenger found Fram in his shipyard beside the river running, where he was overseeing the construction of riverboats, meant for trade with Dale and Esgroth. Though these were humble craft compared to the great ships of elder days, they bore the clean lines and careful proportions that spoke of knowledge handed down through generations. Ships that sail upon wind, Fram mused when he had heard the message through. My grandfather spoke of such things, though I took them for tales meant to amaze children. He said the kings of Numenor built vessels that could ride the very breath of the Valar, carrying them to lands beyond the edge of maps. Those tales were true, the messenger replied, and now the knowledge they preserve may be the only hope of preventing such craft from serving the darkness. Fram looked out across the waters of the running, where his own boats rode, at anchor in the evening light. They seemed suddenly small and fragile, toys compared to the vessels of legend. Yet in his eyes was the spark that had driven his forefathers to dare the wide waters in ships of their own making. "Tell Lord Chéardan," he said at last, "that the shipwrights of the river running remember their oaths to the House of Elros. We will come to the Grey Havens, and we will bring what knowledge we possess. If ships of starlight are to sail once more upon the sea, let them be built by hands that remember the blessing." Section 11. A Hobbit. Remembered. While the great ones of Middle-earth stirred to action and ancient alliances were renewed, Gandalf the Grey walked the peaceful lanes of the Shire, his staff clicking against the cobblestones of Hobbiton as children peered at him from behind hedgerows and mothers called their little ones to safety. To the folk of this green land, the troubles of the wide world seemed as distant as the stars, and the wizard was content to let them remain so for now. Yet his errand here was not without purpose, though it might seem strange to those who thought only in terms of ships and swords. In a round green door at the end of Bagshot Row lived one who had never seen the sea, yet whose courage had already proven itself in the halls of a dragon. Bilbo Baggins, late of the company of Thorin Oakenshield, sat in his study surrounded by maps and journals, writing his account of the adventure that had taken him so far from home. "My dear Bilbo," Gandalf said as he ducked beneath the low doorframe, "you look remarkably well for one who has faced the wrath of Smaug the Mighty." The hobbit looked up from his writing, a smile creasing his comfortable features. "Gandalf, how good to see you. I was just writing about the barrel ride down the Forest River. Terrible business, but it makes for a thrilling chapter. Will you stay for dinner? I have seed cake and honey and the most excellent bottle of Old Wynyards." As they shared their meal in the cosy warmth of Bag End, Gandalf spoke carefully of the wider world, not of the dark ships that threatened the coasts, for such knowledge would only bring sorrow to the Shire, but of older things, gentler things that nonetheless touched upon the greater matter at hand. "Tell me, Bilbo," the wizard said as he puffed upon his pipe, "have you ever wondered about the ships that brought your ancestors to Middle-earth? The Falahides, I believe, were among the first to cross the Brandywine." "Ships," Bilbo mused, settling back in his chair. "I confess I've never given them much thought. Dreadful, uncomfortable things, I should imagine. All that rocking and rolling and nowhere to plant a proper garden. Why do you ask?" "Oh, no particular reason," Gandalf replied with careful casualness. "It's simply that shipbuilding is something of a lost art, and I find myself wondering whether any of the old knowledge survives in unexpected places. Your people, for instance, have wonderfully retentive memories for songs and stories." Bilbo's eyes brightened with sudden interest. "Songs about ships? Well, there is one. My old grandmother used to sing it when I was a hobbit child. Something about boats of willows and journeys over the water. Let me see if I can remember." In a voice surprisingly melodious for one so practical, Bilbo began to sing, "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Life is but a fleeting dream. Upon the water's gleam. Build, build, build your boat with willow wood so fair. Sing the songs the water knows, and bless it with your care." Gandalf's eyes sharpened with interest. "That's a very old song, Bilbo. Older than you might think. The bit about blessing the boat with care that touches upon truths that the greatest shipwrights of Numenor would have recognised." "Does it really?" Bilbo seemed pleased. "Grandmother always said it came from the old forest originally, from the days when hobbits lived closer to the trees and rivers. There are other verses, something about wood that remembers singing, and boats that can find their way home no matter how far they've travelled." "I should very much like to hear those other verses," Gandalf said quietly. "In fact, my dear fellow, you might be surprised to learn how valuable such old songs have become. There are those who would count the memory of a hobbit worth more than all the gold in Erebor." As the evening wore on and the fire burned low in the grate, Bilbo shared more of the old songs, simple verses that spoke of boats made with love rather than mere skill, of waters that knew the difference between friend and foe, of journeys that were blessed not by wizardry, but by the pure intentions of those who undertook them. To most ears, they would have seemed nothing more than quaint folk songs, the sort of thing that mothers sang to children at bedtime. But Gandalf heard deeper harmonies in those simple words, echoes of the music that had shaped the world, preserved in the innocent hearts of those who had never sought power or dominion over others. In the Shire's green lanes and peaceful waterways lay wisdom that the lords of Numenor had forgotten in their pride, knowledge that might yet serve to build ships worthy of carrying light into the darkness. Section 12. The plan set in motion. The turning of the season brought representatives from every free realm to the Grey Havens, where the great shipyards had awakened from their long slumber. The harbour that had known only the gentle lapping of fishing boats now rang with the sound of hammers and saws, as elves and dwarves, men and even a few hobbits worked side by side on a project that would have seemed impossible to any single people. In the great planning hall that Círdan had ordered built upon the harbour's highest point, maps and drawings covered every surface. Here were the ancient blueprints of Numenorean vessels, copied from scrolls preserved in Rivendell's deepest archives. There were the innovative designs proposed by Thrain's master smiths, showing how dwarven metalwork could be integrated into elvish woodcraft. Most surprising of all were the simple sketches contributed by Fram the Tall, whose riverboats had inspired new approaches to hull design that none of the learned had considered. The challenge, Elrond explained to the assembled council, is not merely to build ships that can match the enemy's vessels in speed and strength. We must create craft that can sail upon both water and wind, yet remain anchored to the music of creation rather than perverted by shadow. Galadriel stood before a great window that looked out upon the shipyards, her gaze fixed upon the work below. "The trees have given their answer," she said without turning. "In the hidden grove of Tor Nufuin, 3 Malin trees have offered their heartwood, timber that was sung into being in the music itself. But the price of their gift is high. They must be felled with axes blessed by the Valar, and the wood must be shaped while their sap still runs, before the songs fade from their grain." "I will lead the expedition to harvest this wood," Glorfindel offered. "The path to Tor Nufuin is known to me, though it has not been travelled for many an age." Círdan looked up from the design spread before him. "Time grows short," he said quietly. "My watchers report that the black ships have been seen again, this time sailing north along the coasts of Forochel. They seek something in those icy waters, perhaps allies among the creatures of the waste, or some artifact of power left by the retreating ice." Thrain's representative, a master smith named Telchar the Younger, pointed to one of the detailed drawings. "The mithril fittings will take a full turning of the moon to forge properly," he said in his deep voice, "and that assumes the fires of Erebor burn without interruption. These are not simple ship nails we speak of, but clasps and bindings that must hold not just wood to wood, but song to song, memory to memory." "What of the sails?" asked Fram. "No ordinary canvas will serve for ships that must catch the winds of heaven. And who among us knows the art of weaving starlight into cloth?" It was then that an unexpected voice spoke from the back of the hall. "The spiders of Mirkwood know such weaving," said Legolas of the Woodland Realm, who had arrived only the night before. "Not the great spiders that serve the shadow, but their smaller cousins who spin webs to catch moonbeams. My people have long watched them work, and some among us have learned to read the patterns of their craft." A murmur of interest ran through the assembly. The enmity between the elves of Thranduil's realm and most other folk was well known, yet here was offer of aid from an unexpected quarter. "The price of such knowledge?" Círdan asked carefully. "No price save this," Legolas replied. "When the ships are built and the great work is done, let one be given to my people, that we might sail west when the time comes for all elves to leave these shores. Mirkwood grows dark, and we grow weary of fighting shadows that cannot be wholly defeated." "It shall be as you ask," Círdan agreed. "For the ships we build must serve not conquest but passage to realms where the shadow cannot follow." Section 13. The Fire Awakens. While the shipwrights laboured in the Grey Havens and expeditions set forth to gather the mystical materials needed for their great work, darker tidings came from the south and east. The black ships had not been idle in their patrols, and reports reached the Council of Coastal Towns burned, fishing fleets destroyed, and strange creatures deposited upon distant shores, servants of the deep that fouled wells and blighted crops wherever they passed. But these were merely the prelude to a greater horror. On a night when no moon shone and the stars seemed dimmed by an unnatural haze, the watchers in the northern towers saw a glow upon the horizon, not the clean light of dawn, but a red radiance that pulsed like the beating of a vast heart. It came from the direction of the lonely mountain, and with it rode a wind that carried the scent of sulphur and burning stone. Gandalf was among the first to understand the significance of that baleful light. He stood upon the battlements of Mithlond, his face grave as he watched the distant glow brighten and fade in its terrible rhythm. "Smaug stirs," he said to Círdan, who had joined him in his vigil. "The dragon has slept long in his halls of gold, but something has awakened him, some call or summons that speaks to the greed and malice in his ancient heart." "The black ships," Círdan replied grimly. "They must have passed near enough to Erebor for their corruption to reach even the deep places of the mountain. Dragons are drawn to power, and the enemy has power enough to rouse even the mightiest of the fire drakes." From the direction of the lonely mountain came a sound that made the very stones of the harbour tremble, a roar that spoke of wings wider than city gates and breath hot enough to melt steel. Smaug the Mighty had awakened from his slumber, and his fury would not be contained within the mountain's borders. "This changes everything," Gandalf muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped his staff. "If Smaug allies himself with the forces of darkness, the northern realms will be caught between hammer and anvil, the black ships from the sea and dragon fire from the mountain." Even as they watched, points of light began to appear in the darkness around the mountain's base, the torches and lanterns of refugees fleeing from the dragon's wrath. Dale and Esgaroth would bear the first brunt of Smaug's awakening, but his rage would not stop there. The great dragon had grievances against all the free peoples, and now those grievances had been stirred to life by powers that knew well how to use such anger. "We must send word to Thrain," Círdan said urgently. "The dwarves must be warned that their mountain is no longer safe, and the forges of Erebor may be lost to us before the work is done." "More than that," Gandalf replied. "We must find some way to contain Smaug's wrath, or all our plans will come to naught. A dragon unleashed could burn the shipyards of Mithlond as easily as the halls of men." From the depths of the harbour came an answering roar, not the voice of any dragon but the sound of mighty engines coming to life. The first of the new ships, though far from complete, had been launched for testing, and her crew was bringing her systems to full power. The Erendil's Hope rode upon the waters like a thing of legend, her hull gleaming with mithril inlays and her rigging singing with barely contained energy. "Perhaps," Círdan said thoughtfully, "the time has come to test our work in earnest. If the ships can truly sail upon wind as well as water, then speed might serve us where strength alone would fail." Gandalf nodded grimly. "Then let us see if the arts of Numenor, wedded to the wisdom of all the free peoples, can stand against the malice of the elder days. For if they cannot, then darkness will claim both land and sea, and the age of the elves will end not in glory but in flame." Section 14, A Blade Not Yet Drawn. In the deep vaults beneath Barad-dûr, where neither sun nor star had ever shone, the Dark Lord brooded upon his throne of iron and shadow. Before him stood the mouth of Sauron, that fell sorcerer who had once been among the greatest of the Numenorean lords. His face hidden now behind a helm of black steel that bore the lidless eye upon its crest. "The ships of starlight take shape in the grey havens," the mouth reported, his voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "The elves work with desperate haste, aided by dwarves and the remnants of faithful Numenor. Already the first of their vessels has touched the water, and our spies speak of craft that glows with inner light." Sauron's response was not words, but a wave of malice so intense that the very stones of the tower groaned under its weight. In the darkness, unseen servants scurried to obey unspoken commands, and from the depths of Mordor came sounds of vast machinery grinding to life. "The dragon serves us well," the mouth continued. "Smaug's wrath burns hot against all who would oppose our will, and his fire will cleanse the northern realms of those who dare to defy us. Yet even dragon flame may not be enough to stop ships that sail upon the wind itself." The Dark Lord rose from his throne, and his shadow seemed to fill the chamber like living darkness. When he spoke, his voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates, the sound of worlds ending and being reborn in pain. "Then we shall show them the true meaning of ships that transcend the physical realm," Sauron declared. "In the forges of the deep, where the fires burn hotter than the heart of stars, our own vessels near completion. Let the free peoples think they alone possess the secrets of sailing upon wind and shadow. They will learn their error when our fleet darkens not only the sea, but the very sky above their heads. In response to his words, the floor of the chamber began to split apart, revealing depths that plunged toward the very core of the earth. From those abyssal reaches came the sound of hammering that was not quite like any earthly smithwork, metal being shaped not by mortal hands, but by will and malice made manifest. The forgers of Udun, hidden from the sight of all save their master, had been working since the first black ships were launched, creating vessels that were less ships than floating fortresses of doom. The Nine have taken counsel with the spirits of the deep, the mouth reported. They speak of alliances forged in the uttermost darkness, of creatures that have dwelt in the ocean's trenches since the world was young. When our fleet sails forth, it will not sail alone. The very sea will rise against our enemies. But even as the forces of darkness prepared their ultimate gambit, word came from their spies that gave even the mouth of Sauron pause. In the Shire, that green land which seemed of no account to the mighty, Gandalf the Grey had been asking questions, not about ships or war or the movements of armies, but about simple songs, the kind that mothers sang to children. What meaning lies in this, the mouth wondered aloud. Sauron's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. The Grey Pilgrim still believes in the power of the small and simple to stand against the might of ages. Let him gather his children's songs and hobbit lore. They will avail him nothing when the sky itself turns black with our wings and the sea boils with the fury of the deep. Yet for all his mockery, the Dark Lord's attention lingered upon the reports from the Shire. In his vast knowledge was memory of songs that had shaped the world, melodies that carried more power than armies, if such things still lived in the innocent hearts of the halflings. "Double the watch upon the borders of that green land," he commanded suddenly, "and let word go forth to all our servants. The Shire is not to be touched, not yet. When the time comes for its destruction, I will see to it personally. Until then, let it remain untouched, that we might study what power lies hidden in its simple ways." Section 15. The Kingdom Reclaimed. The first true test of the new ships came sooner than any had hoped, when word arrived that Smaug had emerged from Erebor in all his terrible majesty. The great dragon's shadow fell across the northern lands like a harbinger of doom, and his presence had stirred other ancient evils from their slumber. Yet with his emergence came opportunity as well as peril, for the halls of Erebor stood empty, their treasures and forges unguarded save by fear of the dragon's return. It was Thorin Oakenshield who proposed the desperate gambit that would determine the fate of both the Mountain Kingdom and the ships of Starlight. The exiled Prince of Durin's folk had come to the Grey Havens not as a supplicant but as an ally, offering the strength of his arms and the loyalty of his companions in exchange for aid in reclaiming his birthright. "The forges of Erebor burn hotter than any fire in Middle-earth," he declared before the assembled council. "If the ships are to be completed, their final elements must be wrought in dragonfire itself, not the corrupted flames that serve the enemy, but the pure fire of Earth's heart that burns beneath the mountain." Círdan studied the young dwarf prince with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of kingdoms. "You speak of entering Smaug's own lair while he yet lives, of using his absence to complete our work in his very halls. The risk is mine to take," Thorin interrupted with the stubbornness of his race. "My people have claims upon Erebor that predate the dragon's coming. If I can gather a company brave enough to enter the mountain, can you provide ships swift enough to carry us there before Smaug returns?" The answer came not from Círdan but from the harbour itself, where the Arundel's Hope rode at anchor. As if responding to the dwarf's words, her rigging began to sing with harmonies that spoke of speed beyond mortal comprehension. The ship had been listening, and she had given her answer. Thus began the strangest voyage in the annals of Middle-earth, a ship that sailed upon wind and starlight carrying 13 dwarves, 1 hobbit, and a wizard toward a mountain that breathed fire. The Hope flew across the waters faster than any bird, her hull skimming the waves while her enchanted sails caught currents that blew from the very music of the spheres. Bilbo Baggins, who had joined the company at Gandalf's urging, stood at the ship's rail and marvelled at the waters rushing past below. "I never imagined ships could move so swiftly," he called to Thorin over the singing of the wind. "It's rather like flying, isn't it?" "Aye," the dwarf prince replied, his eyes fixed upon the distant peak of Erebor. "Flying toward our destiny, Master Burglar, flying toward the reclaiming of the kingdom under the mountain." The ship made landfall in the hidden harbour that had once served the men of Dale, now empty save for the memories of merchants who would never again come to trade with the dwarves. From there, the company made their way through secret paths that Thorin remembered from his youth, passages carved in the living rock that led to the very heart of the mountain. In Erebor's depths, they found wonders beyond imagining, forges that glowed with inner fire, anvils carved from single blocks of starstone, and hammers that sang with power as they struck. Here, in the space of 3 days and nights, they worked as no smiths had worked since the Elder Days, forging the final elements needed for the fleet of starlight. Mithril, they worked, shaping it into fittings that would hold wind itself captive in sail and rigging. Precious gems they set into crystals that would focus the songs of creation into beams of pure light. Most precious of all, they forged chains of star metal that would bind the ships to the very music of the spheres, ensuring that they could never be wholly corrupted by shadow. On the third night, as they completed their work, Smaug's roar echoed across the northern lands. The dragon had discovered their presence and was racing back toward his violated lair. But the work was done, and the Arundel's hope waited in the hidden harbour, her hold filled with treasures beyond price. As they sailed away from Erebor, Bilbo looked back at the mountain where fire was beginning to pour from its gates. "I do hope the dragon doesn't take our borrowing too badly," he said, with hobbit-like understatement. "Let him rage," Thorin replied, a grim smile upon his face. "We have what we came for, and more. The kingdom under the mountain may be reclaimed in truth when the time is right. But first, we must ensure that the ships of starlight sail to victory." The Lost Art of Numenorean Shipbuilding. Section 16. A Ring Still Sleeps. In the deepest vaults of Barad-dûr, where the very foundations of the tower were rooted in the bones of the earth, Sauron stood before a great forge that burned with fires darker than night. Upon its anvil lay a band of gold that seemed to drink the light from the chamber, and in that band was concentrated all the malice and will that the Dark Lord could pour into the physical realm. The Ring of Power was not yet complete. For all his strength, Sauron could not finish his great work while the songs of creation still echoed in the world. The ships being built in the Grey Havens were more than mere vessels. They were living embodiments of the music itself, and their very existence weakened his hold upon the forces he sought to master. "Master," spoke the mouth of Sauron from the shadows, "the fleet of starlight nears completion. Already 3 ships ride upon the wind itself, and their crews sing with voices that the very sea obeys. If they are allowed to sail forth in full strength—" "They will not," Sauron replied, his voice like the grinding of millstones. "The ring must be completed before they reach the open waters. Once it is finished, once my will is made manifest in the physical world, no song of theirs will have power to stand against me." The Dark Lord raised his hand, and from the forge came a sound like the screaming of tortured metal. The ring began to glow with its own inner fire, letters of flame writing themselves around its band in the black speech that hurt the very air to hear. Yet even as he worked, Sauron felt resistance, not from any external force but from the ring itself, which seemed to rebel against the final binding that would complete its power. "Something interferes," he hissed, his eyes blazing with fury. "Some influence I have not accounted for. The ring resists completion, as if it knows its true purpose, and recoils from it." The mouth of Sauron shifted uneasily in the shadows. Could it be the ships, Master? Their presence in the world might create harmonies that conflict with your design. "No," Sauron replied slowly, his terrible intelligence working through the problem. "This is something else. Something small and hidden, yet pure enough to cast echoes through the very foundations of the world." His eyes turned toward the north, piercing the stone and distance to fix upon a green land where holes were dug in hillsides and gardens bloomed in careful rows. "The Shire," he whispered. "In that place dwells something I have overlooked. Not power as the mighty understand it, but innocence so complete that it shines like a beacon in the darkness." Even as the words left his lips, the ring upon the anvil grew suddenly cool, its fires dimming as if quenched by an unseen hand. Somewhere in the green country of the halflings, a hobbit was humming as he tended his garden. and that simple melody carried more power to thwart the Dark Lord's designs than all the armies of Middle-earth. "Send the 9, Sauron commanded, his voice shaking the very foundations of the tower. "Let them scour the Shire until they find what it is that dares to stand against my will. But let them be subtle. If what I suspect is true, then violence might only strengthen the force that opposes me." Yet even as he spoke the words, Sauron knew that time was running short. In the Grey Havens, the first of the Starlight ships was preparing for her maiden voyage, her hull gleaming with mithril and her sails woven from threads of light itself. The Erendil's Hope had been joined by her sister ships, the Gil-galad's Vengeance, the Elendil's Promise, and the Isildur's Redemption, each one a masterwork that combined the greatest arts of all the free peoples. If the fleet were allowed to sail in full strength before the ring was completed, they might prove capable of challenging even his dominion over the sea. But if he could finish his great work, if he could pour his will into the Golden Band and bind all the powers of darkness to his service, then no ship built by mortal hands could stand against him. The race between light and shadow had begun in earnest, and its outcome would determine the fate of all Middle-earth. In the Shire, Bilbo Baggins continued his gardening, unaware that his simple contentment might be the key to saving the world. In the Grey Havens, Círdan prepared for a voyage that would take him beyond the boundaries of the known world, and in Barad-dûr, the Dark Lord struggled to complete a work that would either make him master of all creation or destroy him utterly. The ring lay cooling upon its anvil, and in its unfinished surface letters of fire still wrote themselves. But now they flickered uncertainly, as if the very metal doubted the wisdom of what it was being shaped to become. Section 17, The Enemy Withdraws. The great test came with the turning of winter into spring, when the ice broke upon the northern waters and the winds of change began to blow across Middle-earth. The black ships, grown to a fleet of 30 vessels, moved in formation toward the Grey Havens like a tide of darkness upon the sea. Their hulls cut through the waves with unnatural speed, and above them flew creatures of shadow that had never known the light of sun or star. But they were met not by the fishing boats and coastal traders they had expected to sweep aside, but by 4 ships that seemed wrought of starlight itself. The Erendil's Hope led the formation, her hull gleaming like captured moonbeams, and her sails filled with winds that blew from beyond the circles of the world. Behind her came her sister ships, each one crewed by the finest mariners of the free peoples and armed with weapons that had been blessed in the forges of Erebor. The battle that followed was unlike any sea fight in the history of Middle-earth. The black ships sought to employ their corrupted arts, calling up creatures from the deep and summoning mists that carried madness and despair. But their every assault was met by songs that turned darkness to light, by voices that sang of hope, enduring, and courage that would not yield. Círdan stood upon the deck of the Hope, his voice rising above the chaos as he sang in the pure tongue of Valinor. Around him, his crew took up the melody, their voices weaving harmonies that made the very sea shine with inner light. Where their song touched the corrupted waters, the phosphorescent glow died away, and the creatures of the deep fled shrieking back to their abyssal homes. The battle raged from dawn until dusk, neither side able to claim decisive victory. The ships of starlight could not be sunk by any weapon the enemy possessed, but neither could they destroy vessels that seemed to be made as much of shadow as of wood and iron. It was stalemate, until the moment when a new voice joined the song. From the smallest of the starlight ships, the Isildur's Redemption, came a melody that none of the learned had taught and none of the wise had written. It was sung by Bilbo Baggins, who had insisted on joining the crew despite every argument for his safety. The hobbit's voice was not trained in the arts of war, or learned in the lore of the elder days, but it carried something that all the scholarship of the elves had missed: the simple certainty that good would triumph because it was good, that light would overcome darkness because that was the way of things in a world made with love. The effect of that innocent song was immediate and devastating. The black ships began to writhe and twist as if in pain, their corrupted hulls unable to maintain cohesion in the face of such pure faith. One by one, they began to dissolve like smoke before the wind, their crews crying out in voices that held both rage and something that might have been relief. But the greatest of the black ships, the flagship of Heramor himself, did not dissolve. Instead, it turned and fled toward the southern horizon, carrying with it the remnants of the Dark Fleet. As it departed, Those with keen sight could see figures upon its deck, robed forms that stood at the rail and gazed back toward the ships of starlight, with expressions that might have been longing. "They remember," Theoden said quietly as he watched the enemy retreat. "Some part of them remembers what they once were, before the shadow claimed them. The song has awakened something in their hearts that their master's corruption could not entirely destroy." Galadriel, who had sailed aboard the Gil-galad's vengeance, nodded slowly. "The battle is won, but the war continues. The enemy will not abandon his designs upon the sea, and the black ships will return in forms we have not yet imagined." "Let them come," Bilbo said with surprising firmness. "As long as there are folk willing to sing of hope and tend their gardens, and remember that small kindnesses matter, they'll not find victory easy." And in Barad-dûr, Sauron felt the defeat of his fleet like a physical blow. The ring upon his anvil had grown cold and lifeless, no longer responding to his will. The songs of the starlight ships had created resonances in the very foundations of the world, harmonies that interfered with his ability to complete his great work. "No matter," he whispered to the darkness. "There are other ways to achieve dominion, other paths to ultimate victory. The ships may have won this battle, but they have not won the war." Yet even as he spoke, the Dark Lord could not shake the memory of that simple hobbit song, and the certainty in those innocent words that good would triumph in the end. Section 18. Hope in Ashes. In the days that followed the great sea battle, when the waters had cleared of shadow and the normal tides returned to the Grey Havens, Círdan walked once more upon the ancient quays where his journey had begun. The harbour was changed now, where once only fishing boats had bobbed at anchor. Now 4 ships of starlight rode the gentle swells, their hulls gleaming with inner fire even in the full light of day. The victory had been complete, yet the shipwright's heart was heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The enemy had been checked but not defeated, driven back but not destroyed. In time, new threats would arise from the darkness, and the free peoples would need to stand ready once again. "You carry the weight of tomorrow's sorrows today," Galadriel observed, joining him at the harbour's edge. The Lady of Lothlorien bore her own burdens, for her mirror had shown her glimpses of the greater war that lay ahead, not decades hence, but in the turning of ages, when the ring would wake to its full power and all Middle-earth would tremble. "I have lived long enough to know that every victory contains the seeds of future struggle," Círdan replied. "The ships we have built will serve their purpose, but that purpose extends far beyond this single battle. When the time comes for the final sailing, when the last ship departs these shores for the undying lands, they must be ready to carry not just the elves, but all who have earned the right to passage west." Behind them, work continued in the shipyards, though at a gentler pace now. New vessels were taking shape, not warships this time, but ships of passage, craft designed to carry the weary and the wise toward shores where no shadow fell. The techniques learned in building the Starlight fleet were being adapted for more peaceful purposes, ensuring that the knowledge would not be lost when its creators passed beyond the circles of the world. Bilbo Baggins emerged from one of the workshops, his face smudged with sawdust, and his expression one of deep satisfaction. The Hobbit had discovered an unexpected talent for shipbuilding, particularly in the crafting of those small details that made the difference between mere vessels and true homes upon the water. "I've been thinking," he said to Círdan, wiping his hands on a piece of cloth, "about that song my grandmother used to sing, the one about boats that can find their way home no matter how far they've travelled. I think I understand now what it means." "And what is that, Master Baggins?" the shipwright asked with genuine curiosity. "It's not about magic or ancient arts or any of that," Bilbo replied with a smile. "It's about remembering where you come from and who you are, no matter how far you wander or how long you're gone. The ships find their way home because their builders put love into every nail and beam, because they were made by folk who understood that the journey is just as important as the destination." Círdan nodded slowly, understanding flooding through him like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You speak truly, friend Hobbit. The greatest ships are not those built for war or conquest, but those built for coming home." In the distance, beyond the harbour mouth, the sea stretched toward horizons that held both promise and mystery. Somewhere beyond those waters lay the undying lands, where the Valar dwelt in halls of light, and the music of creation played eternal symphonies. But here, in this harbour where the craft of many peoples had come together in common cause, something equally precious had been created. Proof that light could triumph over darkness, that hope could endure through the longest night, and that sometimes the smallest voices carried the most powerful songs. The ships of starlight bobbed gently at their moorings, ready to sail wherever need might call them. Their victory over the Black Fleet had secured the sea lanes for the free peoples, but more importantly it had shown that the ancient arts need not be lost to time or corruption. In the harmony of elf and dwarf, man and hobbit working together, the true magic of Middle-earth lived on, and in a green land not far away, other hobbits tended their gardens and sang their simple songs, unaware that their contentment was a bulwark against the darkness, their joy a light that no shadow could extinguish. For in the end, it was not the mighty who would determine the fate of the world, but those who remembered what was worth saving and had the courage to keep it safe, one small act of love at a time. The age of the elves was passing, but the age of hope was eternal, carried forward in ships built with blessed hands and guided by songs that would outlast the turning of the world itself. Thus ends the tale of the lost art of Numenorean shipbuilding, wherein the wisdom of the elder days was wedded to the courage of the latter, and light triumphed over darkness upon the pathways of the sea. Though greater trials lay ahead, and darker shadows would yet fall across Middle-earth, the ships of starlight sailed on, bearing hope like precious cargo toward shores where every ending was but a new beginning.